One whisper. That was all it took to destroy Miss Rosalind Hartley's life. In the glittering ballroom of Ashworth House, beneath chandeliers dripping with crystal, a single malicious rumor slithered through the crowd like poison through veins. By dawn, her name was ruined. By noon, her family was in crisis. By evening, the Duke of Thornfield stood in her father's study with a solution, a marriage proposal that would save her reputation. She accepted, grateful for his mercy. But Rosalind didn't know the truth. The Duke had orchestrated every word of that whisper, every gasp of scandal, every condemning glance. He had wanted her all along, and he would stop at nothing to make her his. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has travelled. The autumn of 1887 painted London in shades of amber and rust, and nowhere was the season's splendour more evident than in the Hartley residence on Grosvenor Square. Miss Rosalind Hartley stood before the tall windows of her bedroom, watching carriages pass below, their wheels clattering against cobblestones, still damp from morning rain. She was 22 years old, possessed of dark auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper, and eyes the colour of moss after rain. Her beauty was the quiet kind, easily overlooked in ballrooms crowded with more ostentatious girls, but those who truly observed her found something arresting in the intelligence of her gaze and the thoughtful curve of her mouth. Behind her, her mother's voice cut through her reverie. "Rosalind, you must pay attention. This is your future we're discussing." Lady Margaret Hartley sat on the edge of her daughter's bed, a woman whose own beauty had faded into a kind of rigid elegance, all sharp angles and perpetual worry. Beside her, Rosalind's younger sister, Cecilia, lounged against the pillows with the careless grace of a girl who knew she was adored. Cecilia was 19, blonde where Rosalind was auburn, effervescent where Rosalind was contemplative. She was also engaged to Viscount Ashworth, a match that had thrilled their mother beyond measure. "I am paying attention, Mamma," Rosalind said softly, turning from the window. "You were saying that Lord Ashworth's ball next week will be my final opportunity." "Not your final opportunity," Lady Margaret corrected, though her tone suggested otherwise, "but certainly your best. Lord Pemberton will be in attendance. Your father has arranged for a formal introduction. Lord Edmund Pemberton." The name hung in the air like a sentence. He was 43 years old, a widower with 3 grown children, possessed of a considerable fortune and an estate in Derbyshire. He was also, by all accounts, looking for a second wife, someone young, biddable, capable of managing his household and providing him with companionship in his declining years. "He's very distinguished," Cecilia offered, though even she couldn't inject much enthusiasm into the words. "And terribly wealthy." He's old enough to be my father," Rosalind said quietly. "He's established," Lady Margaret snapped, "which is more than can be said for the parade of fortune hunters and second sons who've shown you attention. Your father and I have been patient, Rosalind. We've allowed you 2 full seasons to find someone suitable. You've rejected every reasonable prospect." "I haven't rejected them, Mamma. They simply haven't what? Swept you off your feet, declared their undying love." Lady Margaret's laugh was bitter. "This isn't a novel, child. This is your life. And unless you wish to become a burden to your brother when your father passes, you will accept Lord Pemberton's suit if he offers." Rosalind felt the familiar constriction in her chest, the sense of walls closing in. She had always known this day would come. In their world, a woman's worth was measured by her marriage prospects, and at 22, with no engagement and no fortune of her own, she was rapidly approaching the status of spinster. The fact that she had spent her seasons reading philosophy in retiring rooms instead of flirting behind fans had not helped her cause. "I understand, Mamma," she said finally, the words tasting like ash. Lady Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I know it's not the romantic match you dreamed of, darling. But Lord Pemberton is kind. He'll treat you well, and you'll have security, position. That's more than most women can hope for." After her mother and sister departed, Rosalind returned to the window. Below, the square was emptying as afternoon faded toward evening. Lamplighters moved along the street, bringing small circles of light to the encroaching darkness. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed the hour. She thought of Lord Pemberton, with his thinning grey hair and his tendency to speak about his late wife, as though she were a particularly valuable piece of furniture he'd lost. She thought of the estate in Derbyshire, far from London, far from everything and everyone she knew. She thought of growing old in that house, managing servants and hosting dinners and bearing the weight of his children's resentment, and she felt something inside her wither. But what choice did she have? Her father's fortune was modest, her dowry adequate but not impressive. She had no particular talents that would allow her to earn her own living. She was, like so many women of her class, entirely dependent on the mercy of men. First her father, then her husband, eventually perhaps her brother if she failed to secure a match at all. The following week passed in a blur of preparations. Gowns were fitted, gloves were purchased, calling cards were printed. Cecilia chattered endlessly about the ball, about seeing her dear Viscount, about the guest list, which included, she assured Rosalind with mischievous delight, at least a dozen eligible gentlemen. Though none so eligible as the Duke of Thornfield, Cecilia said one afternoon as they took tea in the drawing-room. Can you imagine a duke at our ball? Lord Ashworth's ball, Rosalind corrected gently. Well, yes, but we're practically family now, aren't we? And the Duke is terribly handsome. I've seen him at the opera. Tall, dark hair, those striking grey eyes. They say he's looking for a wife this season. They say that every season, Lady Margaret interjected. The Duke of Thornfield is 35 years old and has shown no inclination to marry. I wouldn't waste my hopes on that quarter. But Rosalind found herself curious despite herself. She had heard of the Duke, of course. Everyone had. Adrian Blackwood, Duke of Thornfield, was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England. His estate sprawled across 3 counties. His influence in Parliament was considerable. He moved through society like a predator among sheep, beautiful and dangerous and entirely self-possessed. She had never met him. Men like the Duke did not notice girls like her. The night of the ball arrived with unseasonable warmth. Rosalind dressed carefully in a gown of pale blue silk, her hair arranged in an elegant chignon at the nape of her neck. In the mirror, she looked like a stranger, sophisticated, composed, ready to be bartered to the highest bidder. Ashworth House blazed with light when their carriage arrived. Music spilled from the open windows, and the entrance hall was crowded with guests in their finest evening wear. Rosalind's stomach twisted with nerves as they were announced, as they descended into the ballroom where hundreds of faces turned to observe their entrance. "There's Lord Pemberton," Lady Margaret whispered urgently, nodding toward a grey-haired gentleman near the refreshment table. "He's seen you. Smile, Rosalind." Rosalind smiled. She smiled as Lord Pemberton approached, as he claimed her hand and pressed a dry kiss to her gloved knuckles. She smiled through his conversation about his estate and his children and his plans for the coming year. She smiled even as her heart sank like a stone in deep water, recognizing in his proprietary gaze the future that awaited her. And then, across the crowded ballroom, she saw him. The Duke of Thornfield stood near the musician's alcove, tall and commanding in his evening blacks. His dark hair was swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and aristocratic severity, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. But it was his eyes that arrested her, grey as winter storms, and in that moment those eyes were fixed directly on her, their gazes locked. Something electric passed between them, something that made Rosalind's breath catch and her pulse quicken. The Duke's expression didn't change, but there was an intensity in his stare that felt almost predatory. Then Lord Pemberton spoke, shattering the moment, and when Rosalind looked back, the Duke had turned away. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she had imagined it. She had no idea that in that moment the Duke had made his decision. She belonged to him, and he would have her, no matter what it cost. The ball swirled around Rosalind like a glittering kaleidoscope. She danced with Lord Pemberton twice, suffering through his heavy-footed waltzes and his conversation that ranged from agricultural yields to the incompetence of his late wife's lady's maid. Between sets, she retreated to the periphery of the ballroom, seeking refuge near the tall windows that opened onto Ashworth House's gardens. The autumn night beyond was cool and inviting. Rosalind could see couples strolling along the lamplit paths, their laughter carrying on the breeze. For a moment, she considered escaping outside herself, finding a quiet corner where she could breathe without the weight of expectation crushing her lungs. Miss Hartley. The voice was deep, cultured, and entirely unfamiliar. Rosalind turned to find the Duke of Thornfield standing beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in his hands. Up close, he was even more striking than she'd thought. Tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, with that severe aristocratic face that looked like it had been carved from marble. "Your Grace," she managed, executing a curtsy that she hoped didn't betray her shock. "You looked as though you could use refreshment." He offered her one of the glasses, and when she hesitated, his mouth quirked in something that might have been amusement. "I promise I haven't poisoned it." "I didn't think you had," Rosalind said, accepting the champagne. Her hand trembled slightly, and she cursed herself for it. "I'm simply surprised. We haven't been introduced. An oversight, I'm correcting, though I confess I've been watching you all evening." The admission should have alarmed her. Instead, it sent a curious thrill through her chest. "Have you? You're different from the other girls here. You don't simper. You don't giggle behind your fan. You look like you're attending your own funeral rather than the season's most anticipated ball." Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That's rather impertinent, Your Grace." "I prefer honest." He took a sip of his champagne, those grey eyes never leaving her face. "Tell me, Miss Hartley, is it the ball you find so oppressive, or your companion for the evening?" "I don't know what you mean." "Lord Pemberton, I saw you dancing with him. You looked like a prisoner mounting the scaffold." Rosalind knew she should defend Lord Pemberton, should deflect the Duke's observation with some polite platitude. Instead, she heard herself say, "Is it so obvious?" "To me, yes. But then, I make it my business to observe what others miss." He gestured toward the gardens. "Walk with me. You look as though you could use some air." She should refuse. She should return to her mother's side, should wait dutifully for Lord Pemberton to claim her for another dance. But there was something in the Duke's invitation that felt like salvation, like a reprieve from a sentence she wasn't ready to accept. "All right," she said. They descended the terrace steps into the garden, leaving the noise and heat of the ballroom behind. The night air was sweet with the scent of late-blooming roses, and overhead stars pierced the darkness like diamonds scattered on velvet. Other couples wandered the paths, but the Duke guided her toward a more secluded area where an ornamental fountain burbled softly in the shadows. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Hartley," he said as they walked. "What occupies your thoughts when you're not being paraded before aging widowers?" Rosalind laughed despite herself. "That's a very presumptuous question, Your Grace. I'm a duke. Presumption is my birthright." But there was warmth in his tone now, an invitation to honesty. "Indulge me." She considered lying, offering some acceptable feminine pursuit, needlework, watercolors, music. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. "I read. Philosophy mostly. John Stuart Mill, Mary Wollstonecraft. I find their arguments about liberty and equality compelling. Most men would have looked shocked or dismissive. The Duke simply nodded. The Subjection of Women, a radical text for a young lady of quality. You've read it?" "I read everything. Knowledge is power, Miss Hartley." "Surely your philosophers taught you that." They had reached the fountain. In the dim light, water sparkled as it cascaded from the stone basin. Rosalind set her champagne glass on the fountain's edge and looked up at the Duke, seeing him clearly for the first time. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew her like a moth to flame, even as some instinct whispered danger. "Why did you ask me to walk with you?" she asked. "Because you interest me. Because I wanted to know if the intelligence I saw in your eyes was genuine or merely wishful thinking on my part. He stepped closer, and Rosalind's breath caught. I'm pleased to discover it's the former. I don't understand. You're a duke. You could have anyone. I don't want anyone. I want someone real, someone with depth and substance, someone like you. The words should have thrilled her. Instead, they unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. You don't know me, Your Grace. Then let me remedy that. Dance with me, have supper with me, let me call on you tomorrow. I can't. Lord Pemberton is a fool if he thinks a woman like you will settle for the life he's offering. Before Rosalind could respond, footsteps crunched on gravel behind them. She turned to see Cecilia approaching, her expression stricken. Rosalind, you must come back inside. Mamma is asking for you. Something in her sister's tone raised alarm. What's wrong? Cecilia glanced at the Duke, then back to Rosalind. Just come, please. They hurried back through the gardens, the Duke following at a discreet distance. As they approached the terrace, Rosalind became aware of a change in the atmosphere. Conversations had ceased, guests clustered in small groups, whispering behind fans and gloved hands. When she entered the ballroom, heads turned in her direction, and she saw expressions ranging from pity to malicious satisfaction. Her mother materialized from the crowd, her face ashen. Where have you been? She hissed, gripping Rosalind's arm hard enough to bruise. In the gardens. The Duke of Thornfield was showing me. The Duke? Lady Margaret's eyes widened in horror. You were alone with him? We were walking. There were other couples nearby. Mama, what's happened? But the answer became clear as the crowd parted. Lord Pemberton stood near the musician's alcove, his face thunderous. Beside him, wearing an expression of vindicated outrage, stood Lady Ashworth herself. Miss Hartley, Lord Pemberton's voice carried across the now silent ballroom, I had thought you a modest, respectable young woman. It seems I was gravely mistaken. I don't understand. Don't compound your disgrace with lies. You were seen in the library, with Lord Ashworth, in a compromising position. The words crashed over Rosalind like ice water. That's impossible. I've been in the gardens. Multiple witnesses have attested to what they saw, Lady Ashworth interrupted, her voice dripping with poison. My own son, engaged to your sister, and you attempted to seduce him in his own home. The scandal is unconscionable. I did no such thing. I haven't been anywhere near the library. But her protests were drowned by the rising tide of whispers. She saw the faces around her, saw the condemnation in their eyes. In their world, a woman's reputation was everything, and once stained it could never be cleansed. It didn't matter that the accusation was false. The whisper had already spread. The damage was done. Cecilia was crying. Lady Margaret looked as though she might faint. Lord Pemberton turned his back with deliberate finality and walked away, and Rosalind knew with sick certainty that any chance of that marriage was destroyed. She wanted to scream, to rage, to demand that someone believe her, but she stood frozen, watching her entire future crumble to ash. Then a voice cut through the chaos, cold and absolute as winter. That's quite enough. The Duke of Thornfield stepped into the center of the ballroom, his presence commanding instant silence. He looked at Lady Ashworth with such withering contempt that the woman actually took a step backward. Miss Hartley has been in my company for the past 30 minutes, in the gardens, in full view of at least a dozen other guests. Whatever occurred in the library, she had no part in it. Lady Ashworth's composure cracked. Your Grace, surely you understand. I understand that you've allowed malicious gossip to besmirch an innocent woman's reputation. The question is why? A new tension rippled through the crowd. No one contradicted a duke. No one dared. However, the Duke continued, his gaze moving to Rosalind, the damage has been done. Miss Hartley's name has been spoken in the same breath as scandal, and we all know how society treats such situations. He paused, and in that pause, Rosalind felt the weight of her entire world shifting. There is, of course, a solution. Her father materialized from the crowd, his face grey. Your Grace, I will marry her. The silence that followed was absolute. Rosalind stared at the Duke, certain she'd misheard, but his expression was serious, implacable. "A marriage to me will silence all gossip, will restore Miss Hartley's reputation beyond question. I had intended to court her properly, but circumstances have forced my hand." He looked at her father. "Lord Hartley, I will call on you tomorrow morning to discuss terms. For tonight, I will escort Miss Hartley and your family home. The matter is settled." He offered Rosalind his arm. She took it because she had no other choice, because her legs wouldn't hold her otherwise. As they left the ballroom, she could feel hundreds of eyes on her back, could hear the whispers starting again, but different now, tinged with envy rather than condemnation. In the carriage, her mother wept with relief. Her father looked shell-shocked. Cecilia stared at her with something that might have been awe, and Rosalind, pressed against the velvet seat, watched the Duke's profile in the darkness and wondered why his grey eyes looked so satisfied. She had been saved. But the whisper in her mind wondered, saved from what, and for what purpose? The scandal that should have destroyed Rosalind instead elevated her to a status she had never imagined. Within 24 hours, her engagement to the Duke of Thornfield was announced in the Times. Within 48, wedding preparations had begun with a haste that left her breathless. Her mother, transformed from despair to manic joy, spoke of nothing but trousseau arrangements and guest lists, and the extraordinary fortune of having a daughter marry a duke. But Rosalind felt like a woman drowning, pulled under by currents she couldn't control. 3 days after the ball, she stood in the drawing-room of their Grosvenor Square residence as the Duke's solicitor reviewed the marriage settlement. The terms were extraordinarily generous, far more than her modest dowry warranted. Her father looked simultaneously relieved and suspicious, but he signed the documents without protest. What choice did he have? The Duke had saved his daughter from ruin. The Duke himself was everywhere and nowhere. He sent flowers daily, called twice to take tea with her parents, arranged for her to be fitted for gowns at London's finest modiste. But they were never alone. Every interaction was chaperoned, formal, correct. When she tried to speak with him privately, to understand what had happened that night, he deflected with smooth courtesy. "All will be explained in time, Miss Hartley," he said during one of his calls. "For now, you must trust me." But trust was something Rosalind found increasingly difficult to muster. At night, she lay awake replaying the events at Ashworth House, trying to make sense of the impossible. Someone had spread a vicious lie about her. Multiple witnesses had supposedly seen her in the library with Lord Ashworth, and yet she had been in the gardens with the Duke, who had appeared at precisely the right moment to save her reputation by proposing marriage. The timing was too perfect, the solution too convenient. A week after the engagement, Rosalind received an unexpected visitor. She was in her room attempting to read while her mind churned with unanswered questions when the maid announced Lady Agatha Pembroke. Rosalind knew of Lady Agatha by reputation only. The elderly woman was a fixture of London society, despite being thoroughly unconventional. A widow who had never remarried, who hosted salons where writers and philosophers gathered, who spoke her mind with a bluntness that would have been scandalous in anyone with less impeccable breeding. The woman who entered Rosalind's room was 70 if she was a day, rail-thin, dressed in an elegant gown of dove grey. Her white hair was arranged in an unfashionable style, and her dark eyes were sharp with intelligence. "Miss Hartley, I've come to speak with you about your engagement." Rosalind set aside her book. "I don't believe we've been introduced, Lady Agatha." "We haven't, but I know the Duke of Thornfield rather well, and when I heard of his sudden engagement, I knew I had to meet the woman who accomplished what dozens of debutantes could not." She settled into a chair without waiting for invitation. "Tell me, child, do you love him?" The directness of the question stole Rosalind's breath. "I barely know him." An honest answer. Refreshing. Lady Agatha's gaze was penetrating. "I heard what happened at Ashworth House. The whispers, the accusations, the Duke's timely rescue. It's quite a romantic tale." "It's a nightmare," Rosalind said before she could stop herself. Ah, so you have sense as well as honesty. Even better. Lady Agatha leaned forward. My dear, I'm going to tell you something that may sound harsh, but you need to hear it. The Duke of Thornfield is many things. Brilliant, powerful, wealthy, but he is also ruthlessly calculating. He doesn't do anything without purpose. If he married you, it's because he wanted you. The question you should be asking is why. Rosalind's throat tightened. You think I think nothing. I observe. And what I observe is a pattern. The Duke saw you at the ball. Hours later, a scandal erupted that conveniently required his intervention. Now you're engaged to be married in a month. If you believe that's coincidence, you're not as intelligent as you appear. The words gave voice to the suspicions Rosalind had been too afraid to fully form. Why are you telling me this? Because I liked your mother before she became consumed with marrying off her daughters. Because I see something in you worth preserving. And because despite everything, I don't believe the Duke intends you harm. Merely possession. Lady Agatha rose. You're marrying him regardless. But you don't have to go into that marriage blind. Come to my house tomorrow afternoon. 2:00. I'll introduce you to some people who might help you understand the man you're about to wed. She departed before Rosalind could respond, leaving behind a calling card and a sense of disorientation so profound that Rosalind had to sit down before her legs gave out. That night, she dreamed of grey eyes and whispered lies and a golden cage whose bars were too beautiful to recognize as prison. The following afternoon, Rosalind told her mother she was calling on Lady Agatha Pembroke. The name was sufficiently distinguished that Lady Margaret raised no objection, though she insisted Rosalind take their maid as chaperone. Lady Agatha's residence in Mayfair was a revelation. Where most London townhouses were bastions of stuffy propriety, her home felt alive with ideas. The drawing room overflowed with books, paintings by contemporary artists covered the walls. And gathered around the tea service were half a dozen individuals who looked nothing like the society figures Rosalind typically encountered. My salon, Lady Agatha announced. We meet weekly to discuss literature, philosophy, politics. Everything your mother would consider dangerously radical. She gestured to the assembled group. Miss Hartley, meet my fellow heretics. The introductions blurred together. A female journalist, a lecturer from University College, a poet, a political reformer. But one man stood out. Dr. Elias Reed was perhaps 30, tall and lean with warm brown eyes and an air of distraction that suggested his mind was always partially elsewhere. He was, Lady Agatha explained, a physician who ran a charitable clinic in Whitechapel. Miss Hartley, he said, his handshake firm, Lady Agatha tells us you're engaged to Thornfield. My condolences. The others laughed. Rosalind stared. I beg your pardon. Dr. Reed has no social graces, Lady Agatha said fondly. He spends too much time with the poor and forgets how to speak to polite society. What he means is that the Duke has a reputation. For what? For getting what he wants, by whatever means necessary. This came from the journalist, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Collins. I've been investigating him for a story. His business dealings are all legally sound, but there are patterns. Rivals who mysteriously withdraw from competitions. Properties he wants that suddenly come on the market. He's very good at making things happen. Dr. Reed set down his teacup. I once saw him dismantle a man's entire livelihood because that man had insulted him at a party. It took 6 months, but by the end, the man had lost his fortune and his reputation. The Duke never touched him directly. He simply arranged circumstances until destruction was inevitable. Rosalind felt cold. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what you're walking into, Lady Agatha said gently. The Duke is not a monster, but he is dangerous in his determination. If he decided he wanted you, he would remove any obstacle, including perhaps creating a scandal that forced your hand. The room fell silent. Rosalind looked at the faces around her, seeing concern rather than malice. These people, strangers until an hour ago, cared more about her well-being than her own family did. "I don't have a choice," she said quietly. "The engagement is announced. The settlements are signed. If I broke it off now, I'd be ruined anyway." "You always have choices," Dr. Reed said. His voice was surprisingly gentle. "They may not be easy choices, but they exist. You could refuse to marry him, accept the scandal, leave London. And do what? I have no money of my own, no skills. Where would I go? You could come work at my clinic. We need someone with education to help with administrative work, to teach the children who come through. The pay is minimal, but you'd have purpose. Independence." Rosalind stared at him, certain he was joking, but his expression was serious. "You're offering me employment? We've known each other 10 minutes. Lady Agatha vouches for you. That's sufficient." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Think about it. The offer stands, whether you marry the Duke or not. Sometimes it helps to know there's a door marked exit." The afternoon passed in a blur of conversation that ranged from women's suffrage to the Irish question to the latest literary sensation. Rosalind, who had spent years starved for intellectual discourse, found herself speaking freely for the first time in her life. These people listened to her, debated with her, treated her as an equal. Dr. Reed walked her to her carriage when the salon concluded. In the fading afternoon light, he looked at her with those kind brown eyes and said, "The Duke is not necessarily a villain, Miss Hartley, but he is a collector. He sees something beautiful or rare, and he must possess it. The question is whether you're willing to be possessed or whether you'll fight to possess yourself." That night, Rosalind attended a dinner party where the Duke was also present. She watched him across the table, charming, sophisticated, commanding attention without apparent effort. When their eyes met, he smiled, and she saw nothing sinister in that smile, only satisfaction. She thought about what Lady Agatha and her friends had said. She thought about Dr. Reed's offer of escape. She thought about the scandal at Ashworth House and the perfect timing of the Duke's proposal. And she realized she was about to marry a man who might have orchestrated her ruin to secure her hand. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The weeks before the wedding passed in a strange twilight. Publicly, Rosalind played the role of blushing bride-to-be, attending parties on the Duke's arm and accepting congratulations with gracious smiles. Privately, she had become something else entirely, a student of the man she would marry, observing him with the careful attention of someone studying a dangerous animal. And the Duke, for his part, seemed to notice the change. "You're different," he remarked one afternoon as they rode through Hyde Park. The autumn had deepened into early winter, and frost glittered on the grass. More guarded. "Perhaps I'm simply coming to know you better, Your Grace. Adrian, we're to be married in 2 weeks. You may use my given name." "As you wish, Adrian." The name felt intimate on her tongue, too personal for someone she was increasingly certain had manipulated her into this engagement. He studied her profile. "You've been spending time with Lady Agatha Pembroke." It wasn't a question. Rosalind kept her expression neutral. "She's been kind enough to include me in her salon. I find the intellectual discourse refreshing." "I'm sure you do." "Lady Agatha has always had a gift for collecting interesting people. Dr. Reed, in particular, seems to have made an impression." There was something sharp in his tone now, something that might have been jealousy. Rosalind felt a flicker of satisfaction. "Dr. Reed is a dedicated physician doing important work. I find his commitment to helping the poor admirable." "How noble!" The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And has this paragon of virtue shared his opinions about our engagement?" "Several people have shared opinions about our engagement. All of them have been curious about how we came to be betrothed so suddenly." "Life is full of fortunate coincidences." Rosalind turned to face him directly. "Is that what you call it? Coincidence?" For a long moment, they stared at each other. Something dangerous flashed in the Duke's grey eyes. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or warning. Then his expression smoothed into aristocratic pleasantness. "I call it fate, Rosalind. I saw you across that ballroom and knew you were meant to be mine. When circumstances threatened that outcome, I took action to secure it. Is that so terrible?" "That depends on what action you took. I saved you from scandal and offered you a position far beyond what you could have otherwise hoped for. Most women would be grateful. Most women didn't watch their entire life change in a single evening under circumstances that conveniently benefited you." The Duke's smile was cold as winter. "Careful, my dear. You're beginning to sound accusatory. And you're beginning to sound guilty." They had reached a secluded section of the park, away from other riders. The Duke reined in his horse and dismounted in a fluid motion. Before Rosalind could react, he'd lifted her from her saddle, setting her on her feet, but not releasing her waist. "Let me be very clear," he said, his voice low and intense. "Yes, I saw an opportunity and took it. Yes, I wanted you, and I arranged circumstances to ensure I could have you. But I didn't ruin you, Rosalind. Someone else spread those lies about you and Ashworth. I simply used the situation to my advantage. How convenient that you knew exactly what to do. How fortunate that you were positioned to save me. I'm always positioned advantageously. That's what power means." His grip on her waist tightened. "And now you're mine. You'll marry me in 2 weeks, and you'll spend the rest of your life as the Duchess of Thornfield. You can hate me for it if you wish, but you can't escape it." Rosalind lifted her chin. "You're right. I can't escape it. But that doesn't mean I have to be your willing possession. You may have manipulated me into this marriage, but you can't manipulate my mind or my heart. Those remain my own." Something flickered across the Duke's face. Frustration, perhaps, or respect. "You're more resilient than I anticipated. You underestimated me. Men always do." He released her abruptly and stepped back. "We should return. Your mother will worry." The ride back was conducted in tense silence. When they reached Grosvenor Square, the Duke handed her down from her horse with impeccable courtesy, but his eyes were cold. "I'll see you at the Ashworth's reception tomorrow evening," he said. "Try not to spend the entire evening in the company of your physician friend." The Ashworth reception, Rosalind had nearly forgotten. Lord and Lady Ashworth were hosting a pre-wedding celebration in honor of Cecilia's upcoming marriage to their son. The same ballroom where Rosalind had been publicly humiliated would now witness her triumph as the future Duchess of Thornfield. The irony wasn't lost on her. The following evening, Rosalind dressed with unusual care. Her gown was deep emerald silk that brought out the green in her eyes, cut fashionably low at the shoulders. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had taken her maid 2 hours to perfect. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The uncertain girl who had stood in this room a month ago was gone. In her place was someone harder, more knowing. The Duke called for her personally in his carriage. When he saw her, something flashed in his eyes: hunger, possession, perhaps even genuine desire. "You're stunning," he said simply. "I'm appropriately dressed for my station," Rosalind corrected. "Or rather, for the station I'm about to assume." They arrived at Ashworth House fashionably late. This time, when they were announced, the reaction was entirely different. Guests parted like water around them, conversations pausing as all eyes turned to observe the Duke and his extraordinary fiancée. Rosalind held her head high, her hand resting lightly on Adrian's arm, and felt a savage satisfaction at the envious glances from women who had whispered about her ruin just weeks before. Lady Ashworth approached, her expression strained. "Your Grace, Miss Hartley, how delightful to see you both." "Lady Ashworth," the Duke's tone was arctic, "I trust this evening will be more carefully supervised than your last entertainment." The woman paled but maintained her composure. "I assure you, that unfortunate misunderstanding was no misunderstanding, but we needn't dwell on the past. Miss Hartley and I are far too happy with the outcome to harbour grudges. It was a masterful performance." He defended her honor while simultaneously reminding everyone present that he had saved her from the scandal. Rosalind played her part, smiling adoringly while privately seething at his arrogance. The evening proceeded as these events always did. Dancing, conversation, elaborate refreshments. But halfway through the evening, Rosalind saw a familiar face near the terrace doors. Dr. Reed. He was deep in conversation with Lady Agatha and Miss Collins, dressed in slightly shabby evening wear that suggested he'd borrowed the suit. When he saw Rosalind, his face brightened with genuine warmth. "Excuse me," Rosalind said to the Duke. "I'd like to speak with Lady Agatha." She felt Adrian tense beside her. "Of course, I'll accompany you." "That won't be necessary. I'm certain you have business to attend to." It was the first time she'd overtly defied him in public. His eyes narrowed, but he couldn't make a scene without drawing unwanted attention. "As you wish, but don't be long." Rosalind crossed the ballroom alone, feeling the weight of dozens of stares. When she reached Lady Agatha's group, Dr. Reed offered her an immediate smile. "Miss Hartley, you look magnificent, almost happy." "Almost," she agreed. "What are you doing here? This hardly seems like your usual sphere." Lady Agatha insisted. "Something about reminding you that alternatives exist." His expression grew serious. "She told me what you discovered about the Duke's probable involvement in your scandal." "Suspected involvement. I have no proof." "Do you need proof? Your instincts are clearly screaming warnings." Rosalind glanced across the ballroom to where Adrian stood, conversing with several parliamentary colleagues. Even from this distance she could feel his awareness of her, his attention divided between his conversation and her location. "My instincts also recognize reality," she said quietly. "I'm marrying him in less than 2 weeks. The settlements are signed. My family's reputation depends on this match. Whatever he did or didn't do, I'm committed." "You don't have to be." Dr. Reed's intensity surprised her. "I meant what I said. You could leave tonight. Come to Whitechapel. Work at the clinic. Build a life that's yours, not dictated by circumstances or manipulation. You barely know me. Why do you care what happens to me?" "Because Lady Agatha asked me to. Because I believe in helping people who want to help themselves. And because—" He paused, something raw crossing his face. "Because in the short time I've known you, I've seen someone extraordinary, someone who deserves better than being a trophy in a duke's collection." The words hung between them, charged with meaning Rosalind wasn't prepared to examine. Before she could respond, a cold voice cut through the moment. "Miss Hartley, I believe this dance is mine." Adrian had materialized beside her, his expression pleasant, but his eyes furious. He offered his hand with exaggerated courtesy, and Rosalind had no choice but to accept. As they moved onto the dance floor, his grip on her was almost painful. "Tell me, darling, are you trying to humiliate me, or are you simply naive about how such interactions appear?" "I was speaking with friends. There's nothing scandalous about that. The way that physician looks at you is scandalous enough. He's half in love with you already. That's absurd. I barely know him. And yet you look at him like he represents freedom, while you look at me like I'm a jailer." They moved through the waltz with practiced grace, but tension radiated from Adrian's frame. "I won't tolerate it, Rosalind. You're mine. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. I'm not yours yet, and when I am, I'll still be my own person. You can force me into marriage, but you can't force my affection." "Can't I?" His smile was dangerous. "You might be surprised what I can do." The dance ended. Adrian escorted her from the floor and immediately claimed her attention for the rest of the evening, never leaving her side, ensuring she had no opportunity to speak privately with Dr. Reed again. It was a display of possession as blatant as a brand. When the reception concluded, Adrian handed her into his carriage with exaggerated care. "You will not see Dr. Reed again before our wedding," he said as the carriage pulled away from Ashworth House. "Is that understood? You can't dictate my friendships. I can and I will. He represents a threat to our marriage. Our marriage is already a threat to our marriage. It's built on manipulation and lies." "It's built on reality," Adrian shot back. "You needed saving. I saved you. Everything else is sentiment." They glared at each other in the darkness of the carriage. Then, unexpectedly, Adrian's expression softened. "I didn't set out to hurt you, Rosalind. I saw something I wanted, and I took action to secure it. That's who I am. But I can give you everything: wealth, position, protection. I can give you a life most women only dream of. And what if I don't want that life? Then you'll learn to want it, because there's no alternative now." When the carriage reached Grosvenor Square, Rosalind exited without waiting for assistance. She climbed the steps to her house alone, feeling the Duke's eyes on her back, knowing she had 12 days until her wedding. 12 days to decide if she would accept her fate, or if she would risk everything for the possibility of freedom. The morning after the Ashworth reception, Rosalind woke to find an envelope that had been slipped under her bedroom door. Inside was a single card, the message written in elegant script: "The offer stands. Come to the clinic today at 2 o'clock if you wish to see what freedom looks like. E.R." She sat on her bed, holding the card, her heart pounding. 10 days until her wedding. 10 days until she became the Duchess of Thornfield, bound to a man who had orchestrated her circumstances like a chess master moving pieces across a board. But Dr. Reed offered something else, a different future, one built on her own choices rather than manipulation and societal expectation. The question was, did she have the courage to take it? Rosalind dressed simply and told her mother she was visiting Lady Agatha. The lie came easily now. She took a hired hansom cab to Whitechapel, a neighbourhood she had never visited, where London's poor crowded into crumbling tenements and the air smelled of coal smoke and desperation. The clinic was a converted warehouse, its windows clean, but the building itself shabby. Inside, the waiting room overflowed with people: women with sick children, injured labourers, elderly individuals with vacant eyes. A harried nurse directed her to Dr. Reed's office. He stood when she entered, his surprise evident. "You came. I wanted to see if your offer was genuine, or if you were simply being romantic." "I'm never romantic. I'm practical." He gestured around the cluttered office. "This is the work. 12-hour days, treating people who can't pay. Bureaucracy and exhaustion and never enough resources. It's not glamorous, but it matters. Show me." He spent the next 3 hours introducing her to the clinic's operations. She met the other physicians and nurses, all working for minimal compensation because they believed in the mission. She sat in on consultations, watching Dr. Reed treat a child's infection with gentle efficiency, deliver difficult news to a dying man with compassion. She saw him organize administrative chaos, negotiate with suppliers, comfort a young mother who couldn't afford medicine for her baby. And she saw purpose, real, tangible purpose, lives being saved, suffering being alleviated. When they finally returned to his office, Rosalind felt something shifting inside her. "If I worked here, what would I do?" Dr. Reed leaned against his desk. "Administrative work initially. We need someone to organize patient records, coordinate supply deliveries, manage our small budget. Eventually, you could help establish educational programs for the children, teach them to read, give them opportunities for better futures." He paused. "It wouldn't be easy. The work is hard, and the neighborhood can be dangerous, but you'd be making a real difference." "And the scandal? If I broke my engagement, I'd be ruined socially. In Whitechapel, no one cares about society scandals." "You'd have a fresh start." Rosalind moved to the window, looking out at the crowded street below. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to me?" She heard him move closer. "Because I recognize someone trapped when I see them. And because—" his voice dropped. "Because I think you're remarkable, Rosalind. In the short time I've known you, I've seen more genuine intelligence and compassion than I encounter in years among the upper classes. It would be criminal for someone like you to be wasted as a duke's ornament. The Duke would destroy you if I left him for this work. You must know that. Let him try. I have nothing he can take except this clinic, and there are always more buildings." Dr. Reed turned her gently to face him. "I'm not asking you to choose me, Rosalind. I'm asking you to choose yourself. Your own life, lived on your own terms. Whether that includes me or not is secondary. Standing there in his shabby office, surrounded by the sounds of suffering and healing, Rosalind felt a clarity she'd never experienced. She could marry the Duke, live in luxury, bear the title of Duchess, spend her days managing estates and hosting parties, and being possessed by a man who saw her as a prize he'd won through manipulation. Or she could stay here, work until exhaustion, live simply, make a genuine difference in lives that desperately needed help. The choice should have been impossible. Instead, it felt inevitable. "I need to speak with him," she said. "The Duke deserves to know my decision face to face." That evening, Rosalind sent word requesting the Duke call on her. He arrived within the hour, his expression tense. "Your message sounded urgent. Has something happened?" They sat in the drawing room, carefully chaperoned by her mother, who hovered anxiously nearby. Rosalind had spent the afternoon rehearsing what she would say, but now, faced with his commanding presence, the words stuck in her throat. "I visited Dr. Reed's clinic today," she began. Adrian's expression darkened immediately. "I thought I made my feelings about that association clear." "You did. I chose to disregard them." She took a breath. "He's offered me employment. Administrative work helping run the clinic. It's meaningful work, Adrian. Important work. It's work for idealistic fools who don't understand how the world functions." He stood, pacing to the fireplace. "What possible interest could you have in such a place?" "The interest of doing something that matters, of having purpose beyond being decorative. You'll be a duchess, that's purpose enough. For you, perhaps, not for me." He spun to face her, his eyes blazing. "You're 10 days away from our wedding. Invitations have been sent. Half of London society will be in attendance. You cannot possibly be suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that I need more than a title and a husband who manipulated me into marriage. I need a life that belongs to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Lady Margaret made a small sound of distress. The Duke's face had gone pale with fury. "This is about that physician. You've developed feelings for him." "This is about me," Rosalind corrected. "About choosing my own path instead of accepting the one you arranged. Dr. Reed simply showed me that alternatives exist." Adrian crossed the room in 3 strides, gripping her shoulders. "You're mine, Rosalind. The contracts are signed. Your family's reputation depends on this marriage. If you break the engagement now, you'll destroy more than just yourself." "I know, and I'm still considering it." His grip tightened painfully. "I could ruin you, truly ruin you this time. Ensure you never work anywhere, that no one ever receives you. I have that power. Then use it. At least I'll be ruined on my own terms instead of saved on yours." They stared at each other, locked in silent battle. Then, unexpectedly, Adrian released her and stepped back. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but intense. "I didn't arrange the scandal at Ashworth House. That's the truth, Rosalind. Someone else started those rumours. Probably Charlotte Ashworth, jealous that Lord Pemberton was interested in you. I simply took advantage of the situation when I saw an opportunity. But I didn't create it. Does that make what you did better? It makes it honest opportunism rather than calculated cruelty." He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time he looked uncertain. "I wanted you. I'd wanted you from the moment I saw you at that ball. When the scandal erupted, I saw a way to have you, and I took it. But I never intended to make you miserable. You intended to make me yours, without asking if that's what I wanted, because I knew you'd refuse if asked. You would have married Lord Pemberton or some other suitable candidate, and I would have lost you." His voice dropped. "I couldn't let that happen." Rosalind felt something crack inside her chest. "That's not love, Adrian. That's possession. Perhaps, but it's all I know how to give." They stood in the drawing room as evening darkened into night. Lady Margaret had fled at some point, unable to bear witnessing the unravelling of her daughter's brilliant match. Outside, London continued its endless bustle, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in this fashionable townhouse. "If I gave you a choice now," Adrian said finally, If I released you from the engagement without consequences, would you still choose the clinic over me? It was the most honest question he'd ever asked her. Rosalind considered carefully before answering. I don't know. Part of me is drawn to you despite everything, but the larger part knows I'll never be free if I marry you. You'll always see me as something you won, something you outsmarted the world to possess. I need to be more than that. What if I promised to see you differently, to treat you as a partner rather than a possession? Could you? Could you genuinely change who you are? I don't know, he admitted, but I'd try if that's what it took to keep you. The vulnerability in his voice nearly undid her, but Rosalind had learned, in these tumultuous weeks, to trust her own judgment over her emotions. I need time, she said. The wedding is in 10 days. Give me those 10 days to decide freely, without pressure or manipulation. If I choose to marry you, it will be my choice. If I choose the clinic, you must let me go without retaliation. And if I refuse those terms, then you prove everything I suspect about you is true, and I walk away regardless of consequences. Adrian's jaw worked silently. Then slowly, he nodded. 10 days. And at the end of that time, you'll give me your answer. Yes. He moved to the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Rosalind, I do care for you. Perhaps not in the way you deserve, but genuinely nonetheless. I hope you'll remember that when you make your decision. After he left, Rosalind sat alone in the darkening room, feeling the weight of the choice before her. Marry the Duke and have wealth, position, security. Choose the clinic and have purpose, freedom, uncertainty. Both paths offered something valuable, both demanded sacrifice, and she had 10 days to decide which sacrifice she could live with. The final 10 days before the wedding stretched and compressed simultaneously, each hour weighted with impossible significance. Rosalind spent the time carefully, deliberately, trying to envision both possible futures with clear eyes. She attended parties with the Duke, observing how he moved through society with effortless authority. She saw the respect his title commanded, the doors his wealth opened, the power his influence wielded. She also saw the calculation behind every interaction, the way he treated people as assets or obstacles, the fundamental inability to relinquish control. She spent mornings at the clinic, working alongside Dr. Reed to organize patient records and establish the framework for the children's educational program. She saw poverty that shocked her, suffering that broke her heart, but also resilience that inspired her. The nurses taught her basic medical assistance. The patients treated her with a directness she'd never encountered in society. Dr. Reed worked beside her with quiet dedication, never pressuring, simply showing her what life in Whitechapel could be. Lady Agatha watched the entire drama unfold with knowing eyes. "You're fortunate, child," she said during one of their afternoon teas. "Most women never get to choose their own lives. Whatever you decide, at least it will be yours." On the 8th day, Rosalind's mother confronted her. "Tell me you're not seriously considering abandoning your engagement to work in that dreadful place." "I'm considering what will make me happy, Mama. Shouldn't that matter? Happiness is a luxury women of our class can't afford. Security matters. Position matters. The Duke can give you everything, except myself." Lady Margaret's face crumpled. "I don't understand you, Rosalind. I never have. When did you become so ungrateful?" "I'm not ungrateful. I simply want more than pretty imprisonment." On the 9th day, Charlotte Ashworth appeared at the Hartley residence, requesting a private audience. Rosalind received her with cold courtesy. "I came to confess," Charlotte said without preamble. She looked exhausted, her usual smugness replaced by something that might have been shame. "I started the rumors at the ball. About you and my brother." Rosalind had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still sent shock through her. "Why?" "Jealousy, pettiness. You were everything I wasn't. Intelligent, genuine, interesting to men like Lord Pemberton, who usually ignored girls like me. When I saw you go into the gardens with the Duke, I saw an opportunity to hurt you." Her voice broke. "I didn't know it would spiral so dramatically. I certainly didn't know the Duke would propose marriage." The consequences could have destroyed me. They should have. But instead you're marrying a duke, while I'm engaged to a baron twice my age because my reputation never recovered from being associated with the scandal. Charlotte met her eyes. I deserve it. But I wanted you to know the truth. The duke didn't orchestrate your ruin. I did. After Charlotte left, Rosalind sat in stunned silence. Adrian had told the truth. He hadn't created the scandal. He'd simply exploited it. Did that change anything? He had still manipulated circumstances to his advantage, had still forced her hand, but he hadn't deliberately hurt her, and in their conversations over these 10 days, she'd glimpsed something beneath his calculating exterior, genuine feeling, carefully hidden but real. The morning of the 10th day arrived. Rosalind woke early, watching London wake through her bedroom window. Today was her wedding day, or it wasn't. The choice was entirely hers. She dressed carefully in her morning gown and sent word to both the Duke and Dr. Reed, requesting they meet her at Lady Agatha's house at noon. When she arrived, they were both waiting. The contrast between them was stark. Adrian in his impeccable morning coat, every inch the aristocrat. Elias in his rumpled suit, looking tired from an overnight shift at the clinic. They eyed each other with barely concealed hostility. "Gentlemen," Rosalind said, settling into a chair while Lady Agatha observed from the corner with undisguised interest. "Thank you both for coming. Have you made your decision?" Adrian's voice was carefully controlled. "I have." She looked between them, these two men who represented such different futures. "Dr. Reed, your work at the clinic is extraordinary. The offer you made was generous and genuine, and I'm deeply grateful for it. You showed me a world I never knew existed, and you treated me as an equal, when few men ever have." Elias's expression filled with hope. "Then you'll stay? You'll work with us?" "No." She saw his face fall and hurried to explain. "Not because the work isn't important. It is. But I realized something over these past days. I'd be choosing the clinic partly for the right reasons, purpose, independence, meaning. But partly for the wrong ones. Fear of intimacy, rebellion against expectation, attraction to you that I'm not certain is genuine love." She turned to Adrian. "And you manipulated me, maneuvered me, treated me like a prize to be won. You're arrogant, controlling, and fundamentally unable to see people as anything other than assets in your grand design." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I see where this is going. But, Rosalind continued, you're also brilliant, passionate, and capable of genuine feeling, despite your best efforts to hide it. You took advantage of circumstances, but you didn't create them. And in these 10 days, when I gave you the choice between control and respect, you chose respect. That matters." She stood, moving to face Adrian directly. "I'll marry you, but on conditions. I want to continue working with the clinic, not full-time, but as a patron and volunteer. I want involvement in your business decisions, to ensure your pursuits serve more than just profit. I want partnership, not possession. And I want honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Can you give me those things?" Adrian stared at her, something like wonder dawning in his grey eyes. "You're choosing me. I'm choosing a life where I can have both security and purpose, both position and meaning. But only if you can accept me as an equal partner rather than a trophy wife." He reached for her hands, his grip gentle this time. "I can try. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise effort. And I can promise that I'll spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret choosing me over easier paths. That's all I ask." Elias stood abruptly. "I should go." "Dr. Reed," Rosalind began. "No, it's all right. You've made your choice and I respect it." He managed a small smile. "But the clinic will always need support. Perhaps Her Grace the Duchess of Thornfield will remember us when she's settled into her new life." "I will, I promise." After he left, Lady Agatha laughed quietly. "Well, that was quite the performance. Your Grace," she addressed Adrian with amused formality, "I hope you realize what an extraordinary woman you've won." "I do," Adrian said quietly, his eyes never leaving Rosalind's face, "though I'm beginning to suspect she won me rather than the other way around." The wedding that afternoon was everything a society event should be: grand, elegant, crowded with London's elite. But Rosalind barely noticed the ceremony. She was too focused on the man beside her, on the promises they'd made privately before making them publicly, on the strange and unexpected future they would build together. When Adrian kissed her after they were pronounced husband and wife, there was triumph in his eyes, but also relief and gratitude and something that might have been love. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "For choosing me, for believing I could be better than I am." "Don't thank me yet," Rosalind whispered back. "I intend to hold you to every promise. You're about to discover that being married to me is considerably more challenging than possessing me would have been." His laugh was genuine. "I'm counting on it." 6 months later, the Duchess of Thornfield's London residence had become something unusual in society, a space where multiple worlds intersected. On any given afternoon, one might find members of Parliament debating policy with physicians from Whitechapel, aristocrats discussing philanthropic initiatives with social reformers, scholars engaged in heated philosophical discourse with businessmen. Rosalind presided over it all with quiet authority, having discovered that her new position gave her power to accomplish things she never could have managed as Miss Hartley. The clinic had received substantial funding from the Duke's personal fortune. Educational programs flourished. Child mortality rates in Whitechapel had dropped measurably. And Adrian, to his own apparent surprise, had become invested in the work. He brought his strategic mind to bear on problems of poverty and suffering, finding innovative solutions that combined profit with purpose. He was still arrogant, still controlling, still occasionally insufferable, but he listened to her, consulted her, treated her as the partner she demanded to be. Their marriage was not the romantic fantasy Rosalind had dreamed of as a girl. It was something more complex, more real, built on mutual respect, intellectual challenge, and a growing affection that surprised them both. Dr. Reed remained a friend and frequent visitor. If Adrian was jealous of the physician's obvious admiration for his wife, he had learned to hide it. If Rosalind sometimes wondered what life in Whitechapel might have been like, she kept those thoughts private. One evening, as they prepared for yet another social engagement, Adrian found her standing by their bedroom window, lost in thought. "Regrets?" he asked quietly. Rosalind turned to him. "About what?" "Choosing this life, choosing me. You could be doing meaningful work in Whitechapel instead of managing social calls and dinner parties. I'm doing meaningful work now, just in a different way. I can accomplish more as Your Grace than I ever could have as a clinic volunteer." "But you sacrificed the romance of it. The noble poverty, the dedicated physician, the simple life of pure purpose." She crossed to him, adjusting his cravat with practiced familiarity. "I sacrificed illusion for reality. The truth is, I was never suited for noble poverty. I like comfort, I like influence, I like being able to change things on a scale that matters." She met his eyes. "And I like you, despite your many flaws. Only like, most days. Occasionally love when you're being particularly tolerable." His smile was genuine. "I'll take it, though for the record, I love you considerably more often than occasionally. I know, you're remarkably sentimental for a ruthless manipulator." "You're making me sentimental. It's terribly inconvenient." They laughed together, and in that moment, Rosalind felt something she'd never expected: contentment. Not the passive contentment of acceptance, but the active contentment of having chosen her life deliberately and continuing to choose it every day. The whisper that had ruined her name in that ballroom 6 months ago had seemed like a catastrophe. Instead, it had been the catalyst that forced her to become herself, stronger, clearer, more purposeful than she'd ever been as the protected Miss Hartley. She had bloomed, not despite her circumstances, but because of them. Because she'd refused to be merely a victim of events. Because she'd demanded the right to choose her own path, even when that path led through unexpected territory. And standing in their elegant bedroom, Preparing to face another glittering social event, Rosalind realized she was exactly where she wanted to be, not because Adrian had manipulated her there, not because society expected it, but because she had chosen it, with full knowledge and deliberate intent. She was the Duchess of Thornfield, and she wore the title on her own terms. If you've listened to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled.